Welcome to episode 85 of Kontrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kelleran. Today we have a very special return guest on to give us the latest and greatest with Canada, what's going on with men and women and the generational divide, what's going on with Epstein and fix-it politics, all these different topics that are basically top of mind for everyone lately. We were just talking before we fired it up, and there's a lot going on these days, and it's hard to keep up with everything. So I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about, and it seems like that's not going to change anytime soon. But John, thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on, Ben.
Yeah, so I figured since you have a better view of what's going on in Canada, we could get right into what the situation is with Greenland, what the situation is with Alberta, and if you have any thoughts on how all this stuff might develop, because it seems pretty clear to anyone paying attention that the U.S. is going to be focused on securing what is effectively the North and South American empire, and at least having some cooperation, whether it's, hey, we're going to control these places, or we're going to buy them, or it's going to be the next Louisiana Purchase. Like, there's all different types of narratives floating around about these different topics. But what's your kind of view on Alberta first, and then maybe Greenland?
I mean, I don't have much to say on Greenland. We'll put that to one side because that's not Canada.
Yeah.
It's Denmark. But Alberta. So Alberta has been a very deeply dissatisfied Canadian province for like 50 years now. So for your American listeners, that's Alberta is a landlocked province out west, sort of, I think, just north of like Montana. It's we sort of think of it as our Texas because it's like it trends more socially conservative. The Conservative Party that's basically their redoubt, and it's the foundation of its economy is oil. So, key thing to understand about internal Canadian politics is that they are intensely regional. So, in the U.S., you've got like you sort of have like one sort of elite class, and it sort of simultaneously occupies like a few different parts of the country, like basically California, New York, Washington. In Canada, we have sort of three geographical power centers. Out east, you've got the Québécois, who are sort of very, very nationalistic for themselves. You've got what we often refer to as the Laurentian elite. So these are sort of old families who live along the Laurentian corridor, which is sort of the Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto sort of axis. And they sort of control most of the large businesses in Canada, and they control the government sort of through informal networks, essentially. And then you've got a kind of emerging elite out west, who's the foundation of their power, of course, is oil money. And if you look at an electoral map of Canada, it's very different from what you would see in the States. So in the States, you've got your urban areas are all Democrats, and your rural areas are all Republican, and that's kind of the pattern you see all over the country. In Canada, it's extremely geographically based. So Quebec, you'll often see the Bloc Québécois, the Separatist Party, will just dominate federal elections there. In Ontario, the Liberal Party, kind of the natural governing party, usually wins federal elections. Not always, but usually. There is a bit of a rural-urban divide in Ontario, especially. Typically, the Conservatives do better in the rural areas. The Liberals do better in urban areas. And then you go west, and it's the sea of blue and conservative in Canada. So they're very disaffected because for some time now, Alberta has been essentially the only economically productive province in the country. And the federal government basically loots Alberta in order to redistribute their money to all of the other provinces. And this country would basically be bankrupt if we didn't have Alberta. The Albertans know that. And they're also very frustrated because Ottawa and the Ottawa and Quebec elites are kind of repeatedly sabotage every attempt by the Albertans to develop their economy more. One of the big issues is blocking pipelines, which makes it very difficult for the Albertans to get their product to market, which essentially the game that Ottawa plays with Alberta is they want the province to be just productive enough that they can kind of rake off the skim, but not so productive that it leaves the rest of the country in the dirt and becomes the new sort of like economic and therefore political power center of the country. They kind of have to like hold them down while they're extracting wealth from them. The Albertans kind of get that, and so that's a big economic complaint for them. There are also profound cultural differences. The Albertans are they're very annoyed by all the woke stuff out of Ottawa, for example, and that's all been kind of simmering for some time now. With like a separatist movement kind of slowly growing in Alberta. I think like the last poll that I saw, about a third of Alberta's population would vote to leave the country. Something like half would vote to stay, and the remainder are sort of undecided.
Yeah, it's interesting to see kind of the split, because you have some similar dynamics here in the U.S., but it seems like Canada's maybe a little bit more advanced as far as the discussions being had as far as separation or becoming a independent nation, a potential U.S. territory. Like, seems like there's a lot of people that have made up their minds, and that camp has been growing in Alberta over the last couple of years, especially.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a effect of the post-COVID, like post-2020 time period, where I think people like that was a wake-up call on multiple different fronts for a lot of people. So I think there's a lot of people that have basically looked at where we're headed and decided, hey, this is things are accelerating, things have been changing quickly, and if we don't start to make some moves, then it's going to cause some problems later on. So as far as kind of the odds that the push for separation gets accelerated here in Alberta, like what's kind of your guess? Because my assumption is that it's basically inevitable unless like the federal government gets out of their way. But I don't have like a strong view on the timing of it. I think it happens in the next decade or two, but do you think it could happen sooner than that?
It's hard to say. So, like I said before, the most recent poll, which I think was just a few months ago, only about a third of the Albertan population would actually vote to separate. So, if they had a sovereignty referendum tomorrow, like they would not win that. But like a lot can happen in a few months. You could have very effective social media campaigns and change people's minds. Who even knows? The other issue is comes down to sort of constitutional law. So Canada's been here before, right? Back in 1995, there was a sovereignty referendum in Quebec, which was just on a razor's edge. It was like 49.9% of the population voted to leave, 50.1% voted to stay. Like it was really, really close. And at the time, there was a Supreme Court decision related to that referendum where the Supreme Court kind of gave this very vague framework saying that a sovereignty referendum had to in order to be like legally binding, had to provide a clearly worded question and result in a clear majority, something like that. And okay, so what's a clearly worded question? What's a clear majority? Would 50.1% be a clear majority, or so you can sort of see how if there was a referendum and the yes vote, the sovereignty vote carried the day, that would probably immediately get disputed in the courts. The Supreme Court of Canada is like basically all Liberal Party appointees, because they're all just appointed by the Prime Minister. And,
yeah.
So odds are they would probably try to find a way to agree with Ottawa. There'd be a lot of pressure for them to do so because obviously without Alberta, the rest of the country Ottawa would be bankrupt like very quickly. So like Ottawa cannot afford for Alberta to leave. Like there's just too much money there.
They're not importing enough people to fix the problem.
So actually, yeah, we can talk about immigration in this country. That's actually some interesting stuff happening, kind of quietly, but that's kind of a separate issue. Or actually, no. You could actually argue it's connected. So
yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah, no, just quickly. So the Liberal Party, shockingly, has outflanked the Conservative Party to its right on immigration. So over the last year, the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who was parachuted in from the Bank of England effectively to take over the country, has basically shut the gates on temporary foreign workers. We were bringing in like 1 million a year before that. Has slowed,
which is ridiculous for the population size. Yeah.
Oh, it's insane. Yeah. Is slowed quite a bit the rate at which permanent residencies are being handed out and naturalizations are being made. So I think Canada even had like just barely like net negative population growth in 2025, just due to like all of the TFW. Oh yeah, and like student visas as well. We're bringing huge numbers of students, quote unquote students, from the Indian subcontinent, and they've basically all been sent back too. And what's been kind of so the Conservative Party there's a huge Sikh contingent in the Conservative Party. The deputy leader, Tim Upal, is a Sikh. He's like some kind of Khalistani nationalist or something. There's just a whole bunch of them. And you can see all the pictures you want of like senior Conservative Party leadership, including Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, all done up in like Sikh headdress, going to their religious ceremonies, pandering to the Indians. And they actually were like their immigration shadow minister like recently was all up in the face of the Liberal Party government for sending back too many Indian exchange students or something like that. So like, if you want to, like from an ideological perspective, like the Conservative Party of Canada is like sort of the cuckiest of the most cucked rhinos that you can imagine. Like they are not a genuine alternative to the Liberal Party. And like actually the Liberal Party, like I said, that they've actually swung to the right on immigration. They're still like, it's still way too high, right? They're still bringing in hundreds of thousands of permanent residents every year. They just kind of like lowered the temperature a little bit. And the Conservative Party is refusing to dash to their right flank because they are completely beholden to this Sikh constituency. And that is not just like an Ontario phenomenon. That is absolutely true out west as well. So I think that is actually relevant to the Alberta question, because of course, one of the things that everyone, it's like with Brexit sort of, where one of the things driving the Brexit vote was, all the chuds like not wanting England to get flooded by migrants coming into the Schengen area. So they voted for Brexit, and then, the British government turned around and did the Boris wave, right? Like if you actually look at the Conservative Party leadership out west, if Alberta did get its independence, that would have no implications for immigration to that country. Like they would continue importing as many Indians as they could, actually. So, that's which, I think could actually sort of inhibit the chances of a successful sovereignty referendum because, what are you actually voting for, right?
Yeah.
But, I say there was such a vote, and it would probably be close. So if it's sort of like on the razor's edge kind of thing, then it gets disputed. Ottawa says, no, that wasn't a valid referendum for whatever reason, so you're not leaving. Alberta says it was absolutely valid, we're out. I think I would not be surprised. Like that would be an opening for the US to get involved.
Yeah.
And, to basically like they could sort of kind of come in and be like, oh no, we support the Albertans, Canada, you have to respect that, right? And it could be a kind of quiet annexation, essentially. It's very similar to what Russia did in the Donbass after 2014, when you had the Euromaidan put in a Western-friendly government, and then the eastern provinces of Ukraine said, or oblasts or whatever they called them there, said like, nope, we don't want any part of that. We're our own countries now. And Kiev said, no, you're not. And, next thing you know, they were shooting at each other. And Russia, quietly is supporting, giving material support and probably putting military personnel in as well, the separatists. So I could see potentially a similar kind of situation happening with Alberta. How long that would go for, I don't know, because my guess is if that happened, Quebec would be out the door like practically the next day. It could well cause the country to kind of shatter.
Do you think it is that domino type effect where it's like, okay, now British Columbia is kind of cut off geographically and they're going to have a tough time like staying connected, and then Saskatchewan is like the next door neighbor, and that's kind of a similar setup. It doesn't have oil, but they do have a lot of agricultural commodities and whatnot. And from my understanding, they're definitely not on board with some of the stuff going on in kind of the capital area. But do you think that's what would take place, is a kind of chain reaction where Alberta goes and then Saskatchewan goes, Ottawa?
I could very easily see something like that happening. And then, the country fragments and then just kind of gets absorbed piecemeal into the American empire. That might even be Washington's plan, honestly, to sort of like, put enough pressure onto the country that it just kind of like breaks apart and then can be absorbed piecemeal. Whether that's a good idea or not, I don't know.
Well, I don't think we'd be wanting to have any Canadian territories becoming states, but would, I think, our government be excited about Alberta as a U.S. territory and have like a similar economic setup? I think they'd like do that in a heartbeat, right?
Yeah. Whether the Albertans would go for that is another question. Because, obviously as a territory rather than a state, you don't have the ability to, like, you can't vote in presidential elections, right? I don't believe you can send representatives to Congress. You can't send voting representatives to Congress. I think you can send observers, but not voting representatives. So you essentially are becoming second-class citizens. So politically, that would not be a particularly great deal for the Albertans.
Well, they are already second-class citizens. Maybe there's like a pathway built into becoming a state where it takes some time.
Yeah. I mean, that would. I mean, all of these things. There's so many complexities to that kind of situation, right? What do you do with the legal system? Because if you were to do the full, like Trump's full thing and absorb the entire country in one big gulp as the 51st state north of the 49th parallel. Well, Canada's got, like, our legal system is very different from the U.S. It's based on British common law, and then except for Quebec, which still has kind of like a Napoleonic code kind of thing going on. And there's a lot of there's things like Quebec has these language laws about mandating that signage be in French, for example, or that the French be larger than the English. This would probably not be totally consistent with the First Amendment, like, and the Quebecois are pretty attached to that stuff. So, there's a lot of sort of issues like that where it's like, how compatible would it be really? Then you have to worry about resentment building up. Like, so if you absorb a country which is a tenth your size and you do it on a very unequal exploitative footing, where you essentially turn them all into second-class citizens, they're going to get annoyed about that. Like, you're not going to win. They can't win a war against you in the short run. But, like you might find yourself with like an IRA type situation, like a generation down the line. It could turn into just a huge headache, right?
Yeah.
You want to avoid that as well.
I think part of the problem would be is like if you look at how like the projections would be for Canadians voting, right? I think Alberta would be fine if you're looking at it from a more right wing side, but right, if you start putting in other provinces, then
they'd all swing Democrat.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
We don't need any more gay race communism
absolutely.
in the US.
Although there's a big generational divide in that. So
that was actually where I wanted to take it next. Is like, are the younger generations basically saying like it's time for fix-it politics? None of this works, and we want solutions.
100%. So if you look at the voting breakdown in the last election, the Conservatives carried the youth vote. The Liberal Party carried the boomer vote. Liberals basically got elected by boomers and immigrants, and the Conservatives, it was white people and non-boomers. The sort of like 25, I think the 25 to like 45 demographic roughly was like swung pretty heavily conservative, especially amongst the men. So that's definitely a factor. And just from, conversations I have with people out in the real world, as well as, Twitter, I can't totally Twitter, obviously the echo chamber effect, but you talk to people out in the real world too. And my sort of sense is that the base, the conservative base in this country is well to the right of where the Conservative Party is willing to go.
Same here in the U.S., but
exactly like in the U.S. Exactly. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of dissatisfaction over the economy, over like the broken housing market, stagnant wages, high unemployment, and then of course the immigration question. I mean, Canadians have become shockingly racist over the last few years, like particularly against Indians. Like they kind of they've had it.
Funny how exposure might do that. That's
totally.
That's one of the things that I saw growing up, is like where the neighborhood I grew up in basically has now turned into East New Delhi. It's one of the Microsoft suburbs outside of Seattle.
Yeah.
And so it's like I go back and it's just like not even close to the same place I grew up, and it's just it's tough to see, man. It's one of those things where you look at it, it's like, okay, most of the US is now starting to catch up and realize, hey, like this whole H-1B thing is not all it's cooked up to be. And I'm like sitting here like from the last like 10 years, it's like, do we really want to keep accelerating this? And here we are.
Back in like the 90s or the mid 2000s, like no one in Canada really cared, because it's one thing when the diversity is 10% of your population instead of like 40%, and or 30%, whatever it is now. I think it's like just over 30%. And also when the diversity is actually diverse, right? Like you've grabbed like sort of a gourmet sample from sort of all the different countries around the world, and you kind of sprinkle them around different neighborhoods in Toronto, and you walk around Toronto and you kind of feel like, oh, it's like a little United Nations, I can walk across the entire planet, but going from one neighborhood to the next. It's actually rather charming. And we were very selective, so we're only getting kind of the best for the most part. And then that all just ended in the 2010s. Actually, under Stephen Harper, everyone blames Justin Trudeau, and he's got a lot to blame for, but it's actually Stephen Harper, the Conservative Prime Minister, and his Immigration Minister Jason Kenney, who changed the regulations to sort of basically reduce standards and start importing people at a much higher rate and bringing them sort of predominantly from India. So then instead of getting that sprinkle from all over the world, we're getting a deluge from one place in particular. And at that point, it stops feeling like a bit of spice in the neighborhood and feels more like an invasion, right?
Well, especially when you look at the way they do hiring, business. I mean, trucking. That's
oh God!
Like if you spend any time on Twitter, you're good for one of those clips a week where it's just horrifying. Some of the stuff.
No, our highways. We've got one major highway that goes across the country, but the corridor between Montreal and Toronto on the 401 in particular is just an infamous death trap now. Just because these Indian truckers. I mean, there's I think more tonnage of transport on that stretch of highway than basically anywhere on the planet. And just because there's only one corridor to move things down, and it's all Indian truckers, and they are terrible drivers. They're not safe. And this is an industry which,
that's kind of important.
It's kind of important, and it used to be that you had to train for quite some time to get your license to drive one of those things. And these guys will just come over, their cousin will hand them a license, a fake license, the next day, and go learn on the job, and they kill people, man. They kill people all the time. And that's become a major gripe in this country, obviously. So yeah, I mean, so you go back to that original question about Canadians voting heavily Democrat. The boomers, yes, absolutely, they would. They all have Trump derangement syndrome. Then there's no talking them out of it. Even the conservative boomers, they're like, oh, I really don't like Donald Trump because the CBC tells them. The thing is, Canadians are lemmings. I love my people, but they have very little ability to think for themselves. We're sort of very we're a very naturally authoritarian people, right? That's very deep in the national DNA, and that's fine if you have a virtuous elite, but we don't. Our elite are probably one of the worst on the planet, and they just lie all the time. They manipulate all the time, and the media diet in this country is very heavily controlled. Even more so than the States. There's no Canadian equivalent to Fox News, for example. You have all of the networks are sort of left liberal leaning. They're actually propped up by state money. So they're very reluctant to sort of go against the Liberal government. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, of course, is an arm of the government, state broadcaster. And they're very propagandistic on these things. So, the boomers especially have been fed this very steady diet of left liberal ideology essentially their entire lives. And they're just, they can't be reached.
Yeah. I mean, eventually it becomes like the air you breathe. Like you don't even think about it.
Yeah.
It's been, kind of pounded into your head for that long. But as far as, one of the things
just one more thing I wanted to say on that though. I am of the opinion, I know I'm something of a minority on in this view, but if you changed the media diet and started sort of feeding Canadians more sort of right-wing nationalistic content, I think they'd fall in line with that within a few years very quickly. So it's doable in my opinion, particularly amongst the younger generation who are already kind of fed up with all of the failures in Ottawa.
Yeah. No, I think that gets to another point you're talking about with kind of the generational side of things, and that the Conservative Party, like the political agenda, is nowhere near what the actual conservative people want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're just getting to where it's okay, people are more right wing than the politicians, and that's only going to get worse when you see stuff like the Epstein releases that have been happening, because people see what has been going on. And I think everyone I talk to is like, can we skip to the part where we start seeing ropes and guillotines,
executions?
Yeah. Like when do we pull this stuff out? Like,
totally.
Can we make capital punishment great again? Like,
yeah, totally.
Is that the same in Canada? Is that kind of your view?
People are definitely aware of Epstein here. I've been around some people who are full on ranting about it in public. As far as I know, not many people actually in the Canadian elite are directly implicated in Epstein. I might be wrong on that. I might just like missed something, but like it's mostly sort of connected to American politics and British politics. So like how much of a driver that is specifically domestically, I don't know. But I mean, in general, I think people are, and this is not, I think this is generally true across the English-speaking world right now, and probably beyond that. So I think it's probably true in France, for example. We have these governing elites who have become very, very unpopular, and they're sort of hanging on to power with like procedural trickery and but they're so obviously bad for us, and they're refusing to fix any of the problems. And then, the moment like you try to vote someone in to actually fix the problems, and then they refuse to fix the problems, or it turns out they can't fix the problems because they're still sort of respecting the way things were done before. The only leader who's been doing anything different from that at all, or at least trying, is Trump, as far as I can tell. And even there, like my strong impression from talking to Zoomers down in the US is they're kind of like, yeah, like too little too late, old man, like,
yeah,
right. Like,
I think that's what I've been getting to is like, yes, you have a little bit of the bubble from what you get on social media, but then you start talking to people and it's like, you don't even really get far enough in the conversation. Then they'll drop something where it's like, oh man, like he didn't even know, but he's just like letting it rip for like right away. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be the approach where people are just fed up to the point of saying like, okay, like we want someone who can fix it. And we don't care if it's legal or you have to go through the justice system, or Pam Bondi or Kash Patel or Dan Bongino or any of these basically, I mean, stage actors, really. That's all they're there to do. Like their job is not actually to go out and arrest people. Their job is to go on Fox News or go on whatever TV show like their assignment is, and say something about, oh, how we're saving the country and doing all this other stuff, and we're gonna get the bad guys and all this stuff. It's like, okay, well, you can talk about it or you can do it. And if you're not gonna do it, then you're gonna get more and more people that are younger just saying, look, if our politics are voting between which group of basically sclerotic boomers gets to decide if we get Indian immigrants or South American immigrants, right? And that's our choice. Is like, all right, there's a third option. So yeah, I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, totally. I'm seeing a similar thing across the pond in Britain right now. So the Rupert Lowe, the sort of independent former Reform Party MP, has been leading this inquiry into the Pakistani rape gangs, and the stories coming out of these women, man, like it's it's sickening. Like, and then the scale of it is just shocking. Like, people are talking about like up to like at least hundreds of thousands, maybe to 1 million British girls like victimized by these gangs. It's now turning out that like some fraction of them basically were abducted and taken back to Pakistan and like formally married off to these apes, you know. And the entire British establishment just kind of
Doesn't care.
Just let it happen, winked at it, you know, in the same way that they were all totally cool with Epstein, in the same way that Jimmy Savile.
Yep.
Right. Yep. And people are looking at that. The thing with the Epstein thing is like that's sort of like a direct view into sort of like really high level corruption, influence peddling, and the sort of sexual degeneracy of certain parts of the elite. And you're like, okay, that's disgusting, but that didn't actually affect directly that many people, right? Like, I mean, Epstein had a lot of victims, but we're not talking on a scale of like the populations of whole countries, right?
Yeah, it's not just an infestation of people that are like running around with like this whole rape gang mentality, which
whereas with Rotherham and everything connected to that, like you've got 1 million victims, you've got like basically the entire Pakistani community is implicated in this. Like they all knew and they all covered for each other. You've got the entire British establishment is implicated in this, not just like the high level movers and shakers, but like, right down to like the level of like individual social workers and police officers. So it's really this like this thorough implication. Is that the right word? Of like just the entire state apparatus, right?
Yeah.
And the feeling from like ordinary Britons is they want to see people hang from the neck until dead in large numbers. Like, the Packies need to go home. That's obvious, except for the ones they can directly show or directly involved in this, and they can get a bullet in the head. But then the real question is, and what about the people in the government? Because we're talking about a lot of people, right, who were sort of at the very least turning a blind eye to this, but many were actively covering it up. Many were enabling it in other ways. Many were like even profiting from it, getting paid off, maybe getting paid off in kind, access to the girls, like God only knows, right? And this has been going on. Like this, like Rotherham came to light like over 20 years ago, and it's still going on. Like this stuff is still going on to this day, right? It's not like Epstein, where Epstein's been dead for 6 years,
at least in theory.
Yeah, well, he's not playing Fortnite in Tel Aviv, right? Yeah. Which I would not rule out. And it is this very sort of similar kind of thing where it's like we're all like looking at this and we're like, okay, we all see what happens. And we all sort of know what needs to be done about everyone involved in this, everyone implicated in it. But then at a psychological, emotional level, see, for people to take action, you need some kind of legitimizing mechanism, right? You
need that and a spark.
You need a spark is important, but you need a legitimizing mechanism. So without that, then you might get the occasional lone wolf schizo type who goes on a shooting spree or something stupid like that, which accomplishes nothing whatsoever. Usually ends up just getting innocent people killed, and it's kind of pointless, right? It doesn't go anywhere. There always needs to be some kind of authority structure to say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is our moral justification. This is our legal justification. This is who's in charge. This is why they're in charge. This is you kind of need all of that. And the way we do it in our society, of course, is either through elections or through bureaucratic appointment, both of which are thoroughly compromised, right?
Yep.
And we've found that the elections don't get us very far. The bureaucratic appointment, I mean, good luck,
Yeah.
So, and like what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to retool the American state so it can be the legitimizing mechanism for doing the things that need to be doing, right?
Yep.
And that is not moving nearly fast enough for a lot of people. And meanwhile, in other countries, there's just nothing, right? Like there's so.
Well, I'm starting to wonder, like, as you see some of these things going on, like, and again, not advocating for it. This is not going to be a personal strategy, but like, at what point do you start getting like targeted vigilante justice, right? Because there are people out there that look at this and say, yeah, I've seen enough. Like, this guy deserves to go.
Yeah.
And, like, you have former military, like different guys that would have the skills to.
This is especially true with military. What I was saying was, I think, is especially true with military or ex-military guys, because they especially understand like
the hierarchy side of it.
That from an operational standpoint, like if you don't have that, you have nothing, right? Yeah. Like it would be the equivalent of being like, okay, we're at war with Russia. I am myself going to pick up, or like more like we should be at war with Russia. Therefore, I will myself pick up my AR-15 and go and start shooting Russians. And it's like you're just gonna get yourself killed.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's
like
literally all that's gonna happen. And like military guys especially understand that, right? So like I see a lot of tough talk from people, right? You just wait until the balloon goes up, okay, well, they've been saying that for decades.
Yeah. And
I also see on the other side, kind of the demoralizers being like, you pussies ain't gonna do nothing, so far that other side has been correct, largely speaking, aside from the, I guess you had the Southport riots in England a couple years ago, and you had the riots in Ireland against immigration. But again, like those didn't accomplish anything, right? So the thing is, though, those guys are out there in large numbers, and they all kind of agree on what needs to be done, right? They kind of agree on, okay, like who needs to be sent back, expelled from our countries. Everyone kind of gets that, right? When I say everyone, I mean the people who matter to these kinds of discussions or these kinds of actions. And everyone kind of gets like, who the bad guys are, broadly speaking, at the senior levels of our institutions, right? But without a legitimizing mechanism, there's no way for them to coordinate and cohere and give themselves the moral permission to do what is necessary as a group to do these things, right?
Everyone's waiting for the Caesar. The leader figure, right?
That's sort of it. That's sort of it. Yeah, exactly. Whether that person arises inside formal structures or, another possibility is so stepping back from the U.S. again and just kind of like looking more broadly, it's actually we have the same basic problems in every sort of like European derived country around the planet, despite sort of all having a variety of different political systems.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah, right. And that's because, obviously, we have the globalists, like they work
as a plan and all that.
Yeah, they work as a somewhat coherent, like semi-formal, semi-informal global network and they sort of coordinate their policies in their different countries, and roll things out at the same time, right? We saw that with COVID, where just countries all over the world be implementing exactly the same retarded COVID policies. We saw that with smoking bans, where they all started rolling out the same kinds of smoking bans at the same time. We've seen it with immigration policies, where they all started rolling out the same kinds of immigration policies at the same time. Because this is all like sort of like one coherent group of people who, and it's not a lot of them. It's only probably at the top levels, like a few thousand people who are cooperating in this way, but they're all sort of in key positions and they have a lot of power. So is there a way, or are there multiple ways maybe, that we can sort of, as a civilization, think our way around that, right? Like if you look at how they did this, they set up these supranational institutions outside of the individual national legislatures and executive branches and judicial systems and so on. I mean, all the United Nations stuff, for example, all the
NGOs and foundations.
Right. And yes. Yeah. So they set all of that up and they use that to sort of apply sort of largely informal but steady pressure on the policy directions taken by individual governments,
along with the steady flow of dollars. But continue.
Oh yeah, big factor. So could we do something similar? I wonder. Like, can we coordinate ourselves in the same fashion using similar kinds of mechanisms, or different mechanisms entirely, like maybe something like more network enabled, that provide us with the ability to like not just coordinate, but also to give an acceptable level of moral justification, where it's like, so you're no longer sort of having lone wolves kind of doing things, but like you're actually able to like put together groups of men who can say, no, we represent X, and this is the basis, this is the moral, legal basis of our power, and that is actually legitimate, and these other people, their power is illegitimate for these reasons, and sort of use that as a basis to just start doing what's necessary, right? Take like immigration, for example, or I should say remigration, because I think you've had net negative population growth in the U.S. this year, first time in a long time, but it's still like it's nowhere near what it needs to be, right?
They just need to enforce a couple existing laws, and they could have like tens of millions within months, but they're not going to do it. So
yeah, I mean, there are administrative measures that they could take to close down the ability of illegals to have bank accounts, for example, and kind of force them out in that fashion. But like one of the big issues is like manpower, right? Like you've only got 10,000 people in ICE, I think, which is nowhere near enough people to do what needs to be done. Where do you get all the other people? Well, you could deputize. You have to deputize a lot of people, right? But the thing is, those guys are out there. They're willing to do it. They just need the permission structure to do it. It's a similar thing with like, something like, Rotherham in the United Kingdom, where it's like, like there's just a lot of people who need to hang, like a lot of people, thousands and thousands of people need to be executed. Like that level of retribution is effectively like socio-biologically mandatory at this point to save the soul of the United Kingdom. Well, okay, well, who's going to do that, right? Like obviously the high-vis wearing diversity hire police aren't going to do it. There aren't enough soldiers to do it. The government's not going to do that to itself, right? So who's going to do that? Well, the British men have to do that. But okay, then how do the British men, given that the legal system is captured, the legislature is captured.
Yeah.
Right.
No free speech.
You have a coordination problem, right?
Yeah.
You have this problem of like, you need a way of sort of identifying and sanctifying a leader whose authority is sort of unquestioned amongst that part of the population, which matters. And then once you have that, you're off to the races. Like things are happening, right?
Well, you start to see signs of it. I think like things like the Old Glory Club and some of these different groups, like you're starting to see the early stages, I think, in certain places.
Yeah. I think so. We're all part of this huge distributed conversation trying to figure out like how to fix this utter clusterfuck that we've all found ourselves in. Most of it it frustrates me because most of it is just people sort of kind of complaining, like critiquing, right? That's what we've been doing, and having like hot takes on like the outrage of the week or what have you, and like that serves its function obviously, but like I think there needs to be a much broader, much more thoughtful and serious discussion about sort of coordination problems, because like at this point, like we've got sort of this like almost like informal global like fraternal brotherhood of like probably millions of men who all kind of get it, but we're just kind of complaining on the internet, right? And then like when everyone kind of points that out, and everyone's like, oh, what are you gonna do? Like, go do something yourself individually. Like that'll be pointless. It would be pointless, right? So it's like first you need to figure out like how we coordinate ourselves so it isn't pointless.
Yeah. Well, I think a big part of it is moving the Overton window on like what can be discussed. Like that's very important. And there's a lot of things over the last 5 years, where I guess 6 years now since 2020, where if I've started to figure a lot of this stuff out in that time frame, and I think more and more people are catching up to where I am. But I think we're going to get to a point where enough people are just fed up and say, look, like, why should I pay taxes to these people? Why should I cooperate in the system? Why should I do all this stuff to permitted building when I should just like, I think you're just going to see more and more soft forms of resistance, and the organization for something more than that is going to take time and the right people in the right places and a lot more in-person coordination than just getting in group chats and listening to podcasts and like bitching and moaning about different things. But
which I'm not sort of one to dump on that. I mean, those are the pamphlets of our time, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what we're doing right now, is like basically
that's
laying out what the problems are.
Essential. And I think those soft forms of resistance are kind of already happening. Like you have, quietly, right? As it would, like people don't, but like you've got this sort of broad, quiet withdrawal from the institutions that's happened. Not just amongst, I mean, that's kind of a generational phenomenon on its own. Where like, like the boomers, like, they would have their, career with like one employer, and they'd work there for like 40 years and get taken care of with a nice pension and all of that. Right. And, that's not the case for us. Like we expect no loyalty from our employer. We have no loyalty to our employer, but also we kind of hate the institutional life. Like we hate the bureaucracy. We hate, because we're all like digital natives, and you kind of,
everyone's become numb to it.
Well, we've accustomed ourselves to a cognitive environment where we sort of naturally you don't sit there waiting for the TV to show you something on the TV schedule, right? Like you go and find information when you want to find it, and it's right at your fingertips. And you do what you want on the internet when you want to do it, and that's the kind of, and that kind of affects like the way we think about work. Which is not really compatible with the large institutions. So you have this quiet withdrawal out of that, where people are increasingly even happier to accept a somewhat lower material standard of living, at least in the short run, if they can instead have full control over their own professional life as like a self-employed entrepreneur, freelancer, sort of what have you. You have that little professional control. You also have to put up with all the HR bullshit and filling out, T607 forms every Friday or whatever. And that's not even like a political thing. That's actually I see a lot of libs who are kind of, the same actually.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of a generational shift that's happening, largely driven by the internet, actually. And I think like political forums will probably follow that as well, where they're like more informal, like algorithmic, network-driven forms of like sort of swarm cooperation. I don't know if you saw like the Nepalese revolution a few months ago.
I saw a little bit about it, but not super familiar with it.
I mean, I'm not like a great expert in it either, because like who understands the internal politics in Nepal, right? But like,
yeah,
my sort of high level view understanding was basically that it was triggered by viral social media memes showing the nepo babies of the communist elite living in the lap of absolute luxury, and then like people just got angry about this, and then the government got so annoyed about like their baby boys' pictures getting laughed at on social media that they pulled the plug on the internet, which then sent the entire Nepalese young population, many of whom are making their livings online, doing like Fiverr stuff, because like money goes a long way there. That sent them just into a rage, and then they pour out into the streets and then just started swarm attacking the communists. And then I guess the military ultimately sided with the kids when they refused to shoot back on orders, and I think the general even told the cops like if they didn't lay down their arms, like his soldiers were going to shoot them. So that's kind of an essential step when you want to have a revolution like that. And then the Nepalese Zoomers then, because like the general was like, all right, so who's in charge now since you just destroyed the government? And the Zoomers were like, good point, and they had a vote on Discord. Elected
probably less fraudulent than Western voting systems, honestly.
I mean, yeah, well, certainly less fraudulent than American voting systems.
Yeah,
actually, I think, say what you will about Canada, I think our voting system is actually pretty clean. We don't use electronic ballots, for example.
Okay.
And there's a very open, transparent counting process, and there's probably still ways to game it, but it's nothing
not something where you just pump millions of votes into one side or the other.
Oh yeah, no, it's not like where you have like electronic voting machines that just like switch people's votes to like the preferred candidate, and then like you just have pallets full of mail-in ballots showing up like a week after the fucking election. It's like, oh, it turns out the Democrat got 5 votes more than the Republican in this district, thanks to this pallet of freshly
it's time to stop counting. It's like, yeah, we got it.
Okay. Okay, now we got the result we want. We're good. Yeah, exactly. Yep. It's nothing like that.
Well, that's the frustrating thing. It's like that's another piece where Trump and Bondi and all these people, it's like you should have plenty by now to start making some moves.
There's a lot of blue balls with that stuff. Like, I mean, I think just like a week ago, things move so fast, man. Like, I lose track of time sometimes. But Tulsi Gabbard like went down to Georgia to like personally to investigate not investigate, but
one of the voter fraud things.
The voter fraud thing in Georgia. Yeah, exactly. And like I saw someone on Twitter being like, as a former intelligence official, this means that they've got something like, really important, and heads are going to roll, and there's going to be prosecutions. And I was just like, sure there will.
Yeah. Okay.
Like
everyone's at the "I'll believe it when I see it" stage.
Precisely so.
I think everyone's also kind of at the point where it's like, Yeah, you can save the prosecution so we can get to the heads rolling part. That'd be more enjoyable. So
100%.
yeah,
100%.
The last thing that I realized that we didn't get into, and this has been something that would be going back to the Canada topic, is I've been seeing some stuff on First Nations and property rights and some different things happening over the last several months.
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts on that before we wrap it up here.
Yeah, so this stuff is nuts. So Canada was put together in a very different way from the U.S. U.S. Basically was built through purchase and conquest, right? There's no ambiguity in either of those. So, like, you know, when you did the Louisiana Purchase, you paid money for it, that's yours now. Or when you conquered like New Mexico from the Mexican Empire, like, again, like, you took that force of arms, up yours, this is ours now. You want it back,
good luck.
You show up with a gun and we'll talk again, right? Canada, on the other hand, was largely put together through a sort of like consensual process of treaties, not just between the various British colonies and Quebec, but also with a lot of the First Nations. And that goes back right to the very beginning of settlement, French-Canadian settlement in Canada back in like the early 17th century. That's just been the pattern that we followed. And there's just this whole patchwork of treaties is the point. And those treaties are, and sometimes there's a treaty and sometimes there isn't a treaty. Sometimes like we just kind of showed up and we were like, doesn't seem to be anyone here. All right, we're going to build stuff here.
Yeah.
Lately, the First Nations have been insisting that treaty obligations weren't followed, or that there wasn't a treaty, that such and such a place is built on unceded land, for example, and all of that kind of exists in like a legal gray area. The only proof they usually have is their own oral history, but then like it'll turn out that like so British Columbia, for example, where this first kind of started in the news cycle, something like 110% of the British Columbian landmass is claimed by Native tribes because there are all these overlapping claims. Because of course these tribes are nomadic, they move around and they kill each other too, and then like sometimes I think the specific one that hit the news recently, like the claim was based on like, we used to fish here or something, like they weren't even living there. It was just like, no, it was ours. It was our traditional fishing ground. It was totally our land. It's like, I don't think that it's like, so some of it is like literally like some natives walked through this place once, therefore it's theirs. Right. And like, that's nuts. Yeah. You can easily just tell them, no, it isn't. Go away. The problem is that the
government doesn't seem to be willing to do that.
So the courts in particular are backing the natives up. They certainly have political cover for that because the government has gone all in on native land rights. Canada actually spends more on the First Nations than we spend on national defense. And that is with our recent supposed military buildup. It's kind of nuts. And I think the reason the Canadian government has gone down that route is quite Machiavellian. So they realized somewhat belatedly that by embracing multiculturalism as the official state ideology back in the 1970s, they have effectively undermined any sort of cohesive sense of Canadianness. And then it's sort of like, okay, well, what's the moral basis of the state's legitimacy in that case, right? Like, if you're not,
kind of just turned into Canada is just that we're not Americans. Like that seemed to be what the identity is built on, right?
A lot of Americans think that. That's really historically, that's nothing could be further from the truth. But we were actually a conscious rejection of Enlightenment liberalism, and one of the only, basically the only country in the Americas to do so, and one of the only sort of New World countries to do so.
Well, but speaking more recently, it seems
Yeah,
like
well,
that's what the culture has turned into.
In the post-war multicultural era, the old Canadian identity was completely paved over and sort of replaced with this like kind of ersatz sort of American hyperliberalism, where we're like, you know, we're more liberal than the Americans, right? But you know that, you know, even that said, like, you know, America never really did the full multiculturalism thing. There was still this kind of sense of like what it meant to be American, whereas the Canadian government completely lost track of all of that. It just turned into like vague, mushy Canadian values crap, which doesn't give you much of a basis for sort of your moral claim to authority. And what they've kind of settled on is that Canada's moral authority will be based upon being the guarantors of native rights, which then sort of like puts the natives in this kind of like this kind of whip seat as like, you know, extremely, gives them kind of a whip hand, is this having this extremely
privileged class.
Yeah. Privilege, yeah. I mean, like they're certainly not like the wealthiest by any means, but they're very, as a client group, they're extremely politically useful, and they're starting to flex on that, which means, you know, for example, that they're going after, they're sort of pressing these land claims, and that has potential to cause some havoc, because like a huge part of the Canadian economy right now is based on a giant real estate bubble that the government has carefully and assiduously cultivated for about 20 years now. And a lot of that is based on foreign investments, like using Canadian real estate as investment vehicles. And much of the rest is based on increasing demand by high immigration. But if investors start wondering, like, wait, like if I buy a Canadian property, like, and then like a year later, like some Canadian judge decides it belongs to the Hakaputapakapa people, you know, like, then what then, you know, like, you know, do I just lose my investment, you know? So that could easily cause investors to kind of pull out, could cause damage to the real estate market. Like, I don't know.
I know there's been some interesting stuff going on with like the mining industry, where it's like, oh, this is you've got claims on certain ground, and then it turns into some long drawn out process where it's like,
oh yeah, they use this for
circus.
Pure extortion. In fact, like Northern resource development has been sort of handicapped by this for decades and decades now. You know, we've got this whole there's this mineral deposit called the Ring of Fire, just like, I think it's just like a few hundred kilometers north of Toronto, and it's rich with like all sorts of like very industrially valuable minerals. There's tens of billions of dollars in there, and we haven't touched it because the natives are like, nope. And like our government doesn't have the will to just tell them, get out of the way. You know, like, here's your percentage.
Shut up. Here's your 1% royalty, and be quiet.
Exactly, right. Which is what they should be doing. But that would undermine their moral legitimacy. But then, you know, I've joked about this a few times, that like on the one hand, like they're insisting that Canadian sovereignty is absolutely non-negotiable and so on, like we'll never become the 51st state, etc. And then they turn around and say, well, actually, you know, the entire country is built on stolen native lands, right? And they drive that home like constantly. So any public events that you go to in Canada, they even do this at our Remembrance Day ceremonies, which is like sort of that's like a Veterans Day in the U.S. Which one do you do on the 11th of November? Is that Veterans or Memorial Day?
Memorial Day's in May. The one in November is Veterans Day. Veterans. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, Remembrance Day is basically our Veterans Day. So like at Remembrance Day ceremonies like this year, they're like these like land acknowledgements all over the place, you know, like they do them everywhere. So they're constantly driving home this message to Canadians of like, this land doesn't belong to you. You stole this land, you know, which you hear in the States as well, but it's just like, it's really amped up north of the border.
Yeah.
And at the same time they say that, they also say, oh, by the way, no, but our sovereignty is not up for debate. It's like, well, if you're sovereign, then it's not stolen land, actually. Like,
Yeah.
you can't have this both ways, right? So it's just there's moral confusion in the country on that regard, which sort of undermines. Like I was joking on Twitter a couple months ago that like maybe Trump should just like come up and sell and do a deal with like some like Inuit chieftain, give him a snowmobile and a carton of smokes in exchange for like the Northwest Territories. Like I mean, what would the Canadian government be able to say, right? Like,
yeah, buy the Yukon, where it's just like, yep, this is our now. But no, it is interesting to think about with like some of the stuff going on where, right, all these countries are talking about, hey, and this is in Europe too, where they say, oh, we might need a draft to go fight in Ukraine or fight Russia or all these different things. It's like you're gonna get no buy-in for any of this stuff when I think most of the guys that would be of like fighting age would be more interested in
shooting
like what's going on in the capital than what is going on in Russia and Ukraine. So
exactly. And they're trying to build up the Canadian military. I don't know how successful they're actually being with that. But it's very difficult to motivate a population. So I mean, there have been polls which have been done in Canada. Actually, I had a long piece on this back in like November, called something like the Ottawa, the Canadian elite are ideologically incapable of building up the Canadian military, something along those lines. And I just kind of like went through just like all of the reasons why like I don't think they can do this. And one of the things I turned up was that there have been polls done and like, would you fight for the country? And like, are you even proud to be Canadian? And all of that fell off a cliff, particularly amongst military age males, over the last like 10, 15 years. Just because like, I mean, like when your government's telling you like, you live on stolen land, you're this invasive settler colonialist, you're also racist, we're going to replace you with Indians, by the way, we're going to make sure that you can never afford a house, like, and like that's just what you're getting all the time from them. And then they're like, could you also go like fight in Ukraine? And like they're all just like, no, actually. Why don't you go fight? Like, I think
if we started shipping over politicians and their families over to Ukraine, like maybe get some buy-in after you run out of them to draft. But until you see that like kind of buy-in, it's just like you're not going to get just your average Joe. I think
you get buy-in by having a good mission and by having good leaders, right? So like the U.S. had precisely the same recruitment crisis that the entire rest of the Western world did up until 1 year ago. And then Trump comes in, he puts Hegseth in, and then it reverses and they blow through all of the recruitment targets in every service, no problem, because it was understood like, okay, well, Trump's not going to send us to war in like some godforsaken Middle Eastern hellhole, like Groyper sort of like things about like dying in a ditch in Iran for Israel, like notwithstanding, like Trump's pattern has been like throw a few missiles and call it a win, right? Pat the Jews on the head and tell them like, there, I did what you wanted. Let's be friends. But he's much more focused on like cleaning up like South America, for example, which I think there is buy-in on that actually. And then just like knowing that you have an actual adult in charge of the military and not like some fat black diversity hire in a mask like Lloyd Austin. Like that goes a long way actually for morale. But that's the only Western government which has done that so far. All the rest of them continue to have recruitment problems because they have like, they've got like a female minister of defense, or like a female general in charge of the military, and they have all their DEI policies and so on. And like young guys like look at that, they're like, oh, no, I'm not going to be part of that.
Yeah.
And then they start talking about like, well, maybe we'll have to. You hear this a lot in like Britain and Europe and in Canada. They increasingly talk about, well, maybe we should have a draft, to have conscription, mandatory service, because no one wants to fight of their own free will. And like, there's no buy-in on that. I don't think they have the political will to do it either. This is
even if they did try it, you'd still get people go with the same reaction. It's like, okay, you're gonna force me to do this. And it's like that people just drag their feet the whole way, right? So
exactly.
It'll be something where it's interesting to watch. But I just think that with the current crop of leaders, you're not going to get anyone that is not been fed a steady diet of cable news for 4 decades, like to be excited about the direction of things. So, I mean, that's where my head's at on that stuff. But I think it's definitely interesting times. Like that's probably an understatement by a long shot, but
man, things are. I've said it a few times already on this podcast. Things are moving so fast right now. In general.
Yeah, there's so many different things happening where it's just hard to keep up at times. But definitely plenty of stuff to talk about. But before I let you go, I do have to ask my traditional closing question, which is, what book should I add to my reading list? Can be history, can be finance, investments, anything you think.
I would say the most interesting book I've read in the last couple of months is probably Regime Change from the Right by Martin Sellner. Have you come across that yet?
I have not.
So
sounds like something I'd like, though.
It's good. It's succinct. It's only a couple hundred pages long, very to the point. And he essentially lays out a systematic strategy to accomplish what he calls reconquista, a sort of retaking of the institutions of society from sort of in each key strategic direction, with the overarching unifying goal of achieving remigration in our lifetimes, in the near future. It's very well thought through. He's pretty realistic about it, in the sense that, he sort of goes through what the other strategies could be and probably why they're not a great idea, why remigration is probably the best bet for a right-wing reconquista. But also, he's realistic enough to kind of say, emphasize even that the window during which we can do this peacefully is closing very quickly. And if we miss that window, then it's going to have to be a different goal.
Yeah.
And,
I think that window is like the next 5, 10, maybe 15 years for it to really accelerate.
Yeah, I would say 5 to 10 years. I think it's absolutely in the next few years, we pretty much have to clean out the trader elites from our countries. That's an absolute necessary first step. We cannot have these people running things anymore.
Yeah.
And once they have been removed, then it starts being possible to to start sending people home.
Yeah.
And start actually rebuilding things. Because as long as they're just they're screwing everything up, stabbing everyone in the back, just break. And I think they're going to do a lot of damage on the way out. I think the Europeans, especially, I have the impression that they sort of see the writing on the wall. They're not happy about it. They're pretty angry about it, actually. But they sort of realize that they're not going to be able to hold on to power for very much longer. One way or the other, they're out. And on the one hand, they're desperate, and desperate people do very stupid things, very dangerous things. But on the other hand, I think just out of spite, I think they might break stuff on the way out. Because these really are just, they're just awful human beings.
Yeah, that seems to be the MO if you look back at history. But if my listeners are looking to find you on social media, find your Substack, find your writing, which is very good, always entertaining, where should they look for you? So
on Twitter, you can find me at Martian Weirdlords. WYRD, and barsoom.substack.com, postcards from Barsoom.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Haven't seen many people that have like the ability to write some of like the mega viral posts on university, DEI, some of these different topics that are definitely becoming a bigger part of the zeitgeist. But it seems like you've been right at the forefront of that for the last couple of years. So definitely worth checking his stuff out. So
thanks, man. Yeah. No, I haven't written about that subject actually for several months now. But my last one, the class of 2026, I was told privately that it was quoted in the keynote address at the Heterodox Academy convention like a couple of weeks later.
Yeah. Well, there's
like, oh damn.
That's the thing with this will be a last thought, I promise, but with some of the guys that you see, especially as you start to get bigger audiences, and like I'm not talking about myself at all, but the guys that are consistently putting out like very good content and are like very clearly right wing, you know, that's ending up in higher places as far as political offices and their staffers and the people they talk to, especially when you see some of the stuff that's being tossed around on social media. Like it's pretty clear that things are shifting, and those ones are blowing in the right direction, which I think at least is a good sign for now. So
this is why I think like the kind of digital pamphleteering we do is so important, right? You never know who's reading it, but like I've had enough times where I would sort of be told like privately, oh yeah, like these people read you, or like they read this or what have you. I'm like, oh damn, like and that's happened to friends of mine as well. It's actually, and it's something you do realize as your audience starts to grow that it's a much smaller world than we often think it is, right? Like you see a platform like Twitter, there's tens of millions of people using hundreds of millions. I'm not sure exactly, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
But in terms of accounts that are sort of moving the needle on things, or like sort of the high profile, high follower ones, it's actually a very small world. And
if you have some connections, you're a hop, skip, and a jump away from some very powerful people, where it's like you're one or two steps removed from like very high net worth investors or people that have political influence or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so if you put an idea out there, if it resonates, and then other people pick it up, maybe they pass on your thing, maybe they just amplify the idea in their own words, and eventually, like that sweet music reaches the ears of people who can do things.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I could keep chatting and shooting the breeze for another couple hours, but I think it's time to let you get back to it. So I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.